Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Senate and House Republican media availability. I'm Kim Wirtz, Communications Director for Senate Republicans. Today, I'm joined by Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th Legislative District, Senator Ann Rivers from the 25th Legislative District. She is the ranking Republican on the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee. House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox, representing the 2nd Legislative District, and Representative Stokesbury from the 31st Legislative District. And Representative Stokesbury is the ranking Republican on the House Appropriations Committee. Senator Braun, would you like to kick us off with some opening comments?
You bet. Thank you, Kim. And thanks everyone for being here this morning. Lots going on here in the Capitol, and we continue to focus on our top priorities. You've heard me say many times, public safety. I think we're making progress. Very proud that we got bills out of the Senate last week and the week before to deal with the Blake decision and the vehicular pursuit issue. Neither of them are perfect bills, but we trust our colleagues in the House are going to perfect them and send them back our way for concurrence. So I think that's a big step. These are things we weren't sure we could keep alive. We were able to keep them alive and in consideration. These are very important issues for folks around our state that are dealing or worried rather about the safety of their families, their communities. So step in the right direction. Other things happening on public safety, I think you're going to see in the budgets, which will roll out in the next couple of weeks, having to do with more training centers across the state for the Regional Criminal Justice Training Commission, allow us to rebuild our law enforcement cadre that's declined significantly over the last several years, 500 fewer officers after 2022 than we had after 2021. So we have a big problem to fix there, and that's an important thing we can't forget. I think will be addressed in the budget. On affordability, a number of things going on. Housing, we've talked about many times. There's some, I think in both chambers, we did quite a bit along these lines. We sent some, I think, good housing bills over to the House, and the House sent us some good ones to consider. The middle housing bill, the lot splitting bill, the ADU bill are all good bills that were worked hard in a bipartisan manner. And I think that we look forward to the opportunity to hear them and hopefully move those along. Other affordability issue I've been talking a lot about is hospitals. Now, this has been a big issue. How do we keep our hospitals whole and operating? This is really important in many of the districts we represent where you have small hospitals who are struggling, frankly. We need to do something to get our Medicaid rates up. That's a bill we haven't seen dropped yet, but hopefully will happen pretty soon. And that's all, of course, a budget issue as well. So a lot of work to do there. And then there were some challenging bills for hospitals that luckily didn't move out of either chamber. The mergers and acquisition bill, the contracting bill, very hard on hospitals. We did see the nurse staffing bill move, but move in a way that's reasonable and achievable and won't drive up healthcare costs and more effectively deals with the real issue with nursing. We saw another bill from Senator Holy that helps deal with the supply of nursing and training more nurses. That's an important part of solving this problem in a real way. The last thing I'd mention on affordability is one I think many folks have forgotten, and we were reminded last week with the auction for our cap and trade system, where the price for carbon came in at over twice what was initially projected when the bill was passed a couple of years ago. And what this means, people seem to forget, this is fundamentally a tax, and it's mostly a very regressive tax on the people of our state, principally for transportation. So it's affecting those who are already living close to poverty or in poverty, affecting them more than the rest of the state. And what we learned last week, it's going to cost them twice as much as the proponents of that bill thought it would. So this is a big deal. It's one more way we're making Washington unaffordable for the folks living in the middle in our state. And the last thing I'd mention is education. Progress there. We saw both chambers pass out bills on special education. Sound a little parochial here. I think the Senate's bill does a little bit more and gets after the problem a little bit more. Neither of them, though, I will tell you, solve the entire problem, but they are both steps in the right direction. We need to properly fund our special education and our K-12 public education system. And then the other thing I'd mention there is work on learning loss. Most of that effort has moved into the budget process, and I'm hopeful that we'll see significant proposals from both the House and the Senate that get after funding, additional tutoring, additional instruction, summer school, so we can help get our kids back on track. So lots of stuff going on. We're in week number 10, and we got 6-7 weeks, whatever it is, 6 weeks, I guess. had to do some math to finish this up. And I'm optimistic we can get a good outcome if we stay focused. I'll take from there. I will turn it over to Representative Wilcox.
Thanks very much, John. It seems to me that the House Democrats were probably the most ambitious caucus in the building this time around, and they passed out a very large number of bills. Some of them pretty well worked bipartisan bills, and I'll talk about those. Some of them among the most ideological bills that have ever passed out of a chamber in the state of Washington. We also, I think, had some really strong work by committee chairs and ranking members in a few cases. Some of those produced great work. Others ended up creating confusion and disappointment in the end. And I think I'll start with housing. John did a pretty good job of talking about all the good bills that came out of the House. And those were bills that were very cooperatively crafted. Andrew Barkas, Mark Clicker, and a number of Democrats were involved in those things. And the end result is a lot more opportunities to build housing for people that live in the urban parts of Washington. There's a lot of doomsayers around those bills. I think the impact is going to be slow and steady rather than catastrophically fast. And they did a good job of listening to the people that had concerns. There was also a couple of bills out there that had to do with rent control, which Republicans are quite sure is, if it's ever implemented, is going to be a disastrous experiment, as it has been elsewhere in the country. Those bills all died. There was a really strong effort to create a bipartisan compromise around a lot of regulations between landlords and tenants. And everybody thought that there was a deal. The deal collapsed on the last day, and the bill ended up not running at all. And I think there's quite a bit of consternation about there. But the final compromise we would have been fine with, but that wasn't allowed to come to the floor. Another area that I thought was a real positive thing was the Ag and Natural Resources Committee, where the Democratic chair announced early in the session that he wasn't going to bring out anything but bipartisan bills, and he worked very, very hard on that. And the final result, I think, was something that would surprise a lot of people: a very bipartisan carbon bill that would allow the beneficiaries of state-owned forests to benefit from the sale of carbon by the Commissioner of Public Lands. Sorry, I tripped over some of those titles there. It was worked over the last few weeks, and I think was quite a successful effort in bringing some disparate groups together that very rarely agree on things. I thought that was a major positive. When it comes to public safety, I think we had some huge disappointments over here. First of all, it was very plain that the effort to remove consequences from people that are responsible for the most violent and harmful crimes is continuing in the House Democratic Caucus. A bill which was extensively debated and opposed unanimously by Republicans that removed many of the sentence enhancements around violent crimes, crimes committed with firearms, crimes committed close to schools, and crimes committed against especially vulnerable people was passed. Again, that removes the enhancements. That caused quite a bit of consternation, because a little later, after the consequences were reduced for people that commit crimes with firearms, the ability of law-abiding citizens to purchase firearms was restricted in ways that we haven't seen here in Washington, and which will probably be found to be unconstitutional. We also, at the last moment, were very disappointed that there was no path for a pursuit bill coming out of the House. I'm glad that at the last minute, responsible people over in the Senate were able to bring that out. We would like to see that bill restored to its original form, which was sponsored by Democratic Representative Alicia Rule and 20 other Democrats. So clearly there's enough votes to do that. It would go a long ways towards restoring the idea that people that commit crimes can't just flee away from their consequences. I think that we now have seen, after 2 years of experimentation, that the simplistic approach of the proponents of the policies of 2 years ago really didn't have the backing of data, or if it was data, it was a simplistic look at data, as has been exposed in the press over the last few weeks. Lots of other things happened. I hope that you'll have some questions. And of course, we have Drew Stokesbury with us, who has the answer to almost any question. Thanks.
All right, Kim, back to you.
Okay, terrific. Well, first we'll start off with Laurel Demkovich from the Spokesman. Go ahead, Laurel.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to ask on something you mentioned, Representative Wilcox, the carbon bill. I guess, can you just elaborate a bit more on your thoughts on that? And it looks like in the House that the vote in your party was a little bit split. So can you, I guess, explain maybe where some of that was coming from in the House?
Yeah, and I will help you with the definition of what I think a great bill is. It's very often a bill that involves the middle of both parties, with people, maybe not quite in the middle, often having some concerns. The concerns are often legitimate, so I'm glad that they are voicing those. And with a impactful bill, having a split vote and a robust debate is a pretty positive thing. What this bill does is it allows the commissioner to sell carbon credits when they're doing things that will increase sequestration of carbon in Washington State forests. The concerns around that are that we have a large part of the rural economy that's dependent on continuing to harvest those forests, running them through our sawmills, and providing high-paying rural jobs. That's very, very critical. We did everything we could in the bill to make it additive to more acres and more trees growing rather than reducing harvests. But I am 100% behind people that are concerned that we make every effort to be sure that we're not damaging these rural jobs. And as the bill continues through the process, I think people will end up being more secure about it. So I'm behind the people that voted yes. I voted yes. And I'm supportive of the people that voted no with concerns as well.
Laurel, did you have another question?
Yeah, on another topic, ahead of the revenue forecast next week and budget proposals probably coming shortly after. I know you've mentioned already a little bit some of the things you're looking for, but is there anything in particular you're expecting in those first proposals, what you might be hoping for or not hoping for in either chamber?
Well, I would say in the Senate, we've laid our priorities out pretty clearly to the chair of Ways and Means. We're looking for thoughtful investment in services around the state, particularly focused on the three things I mentioned earlier: public safety. How do we invest in public safety? How do we help make life more affordable for Washingtonians? How do we invest in getting our education back on track? I'd highlight a couple of those items. I mentioned before, investment in tutoring and additional education. When it comes to affordability, that's a pretty simple one for us. We'd like to see a budget without additional taxes. I think that's certainly possible, and we're in pretty good shape budget-wise right now. And of course, we have the revenue forecast coming up, and I expect it to be modestly positive, is my guess. I think Drew probably has a better insight into where that might land. But I think we've been fortunate so far in the Senate. The majority has kept us involved. I think that's a positive thing. I don't think we expect to get everything we want, but it's good to have a voice. And if we can do a budget that doesn't have new taxes, that invests in our priorities, then we're going to look pretty hard at it.
And I will defer to Drew.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Senator Braun said. What we would like to see over in the House Republican caucus, I think, is pretty similar to what Senate Republicans would like to see. responsible, sustainable investments in our priorities. I think chief of which needs to be ameliorating the severe learning loss that occurred while schools were closed and learning was then tried to be conducted virtually. Disappointed that the governor's budget didn't do more, and would like to think that the House and Senate budgets will do something there, but that remains to be seen. I think what we are likely to see, unfortunately, is a lot of the state's revenue growth spread around like peanut butter. I'm not sure that is the right approach. Just to give one of many examples, last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, the days kind of have run together when we were on the floor. There was a bill to increase funding for special education, which Senator Braun alluded to. House Republicans were pretty disappointed that that bill was significantly narrowed from the version how it was introduced to the version it looked like on the floor. We had an amendment to significantly increase the amount of funding and also provide some new services to improve the effectiveness of that funding. House Republicans spent at least an hour debating that and talking about why it was important to fully fund special education. Unfortunately, the chair of the House Appropriations Committee said that they couldn't increase special ed funding because there were so many other priorities of government. And that's not to demean the other things that the budget needs to fund, but none of those other things are the state's paramount duty. So I would like to see us return to a situation where we are funding education first, and then looking to see what other needs exist. I'd also like to see some broad-based tax relief, for what feels like the 100th time. I will remind folks that states like California, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey all found ways to pass broad-based tax relief during the COVID years. Washington is one of the only states that has not done that. The budget will likely spend $70 billion over the next 2 years. For context, it was about $35 billion when I was elected 9 sessions ago. So with the budget nearly doubling in 8 or 9 years, there should be plenty of money for tax cuts. I will be surprised if there's tax cuts, but I certainly hope there is not tax increases, but I fear that might be the case. There are some tax bills coming through finance that I suspect might be part of the budget proposal, and that just simply isn't necessary. So again, echoing what Senator Braun said, I think we'd like to see investments in our priorities like education. I think the concern, though, is that there will just be kind of unrestrained growth in spending that is not targeted in the areas that are most important to the needs of the state.
Hey, if I can jump back in, 2 things. One, I just want to reinforce the House Republican caucus did a fabulous job in fighting for special education funding last week. I watched part of that debate. They did a great job, and they really highlighted why it's important to our caucuses and really put the House Democrats on the spot when they would not stand up and fund special education as is our paramount duty. The other thing I wanted to, so good job to them. Very well done. The other thing I wanted to do is point out what I mentioned earlier, because I think it's going to play into maybe all 3 of the budgets, and that's the funding that came in from the cap and trade auction from last week. We could, I think, overall see more than $1 billion more than expected, even in the revised forecast from the cap and trade auctions that will now happen quarterly under the current law. How the majority spends that money is enormously important, and I think that Representative Stokesbury represented the bad way. If they just take that money and spread it everywhere, do no significant good with a significant amount of money, that will be not only wasteful, will take the situation where we're increasing a very regressive tax on middle income and poor Washingtonians, and we're doing nothing to help them. Where we could, whether it's in tax relief, as he mentioned, or in investing that in ways that aren't just wasteful and actually result in big new improvements. And I would suggest, investments in transportation that help everyone, investments in the capital budget that help everyone. These are things that will make a difference if we're, the first choice, of course, would be tax relief. But if we can't get that, make sure we don't just, lump it on top in the operating budget and it goes out the door without any real change to the lives of Washingtonians.
Great. Thank you, Laurel. And next we'll turn to Claire Withicum from the Seattle Times. Go ahead, Claire.
Thank you. Good morning. In light of Sunshine Week, I wanted to ask about Senate Bill 5112, which I believe Senators Braun and Rivers voted against this bill would, among other things, exempt from disclosure the specific birth dates of people on the voter registration rolls. And I'm just curious if either or both of you could explain your vote on that.
5112. Well, you got me. I have to think about that for a second, Laurel. Let me look it up. I don't think it was the, as I recall, it's not the disclosure. I think that was the concern was that it's putting additional restrictions on our voting system, but honestly drawing a blank.
Claire, did you have another question you wanted to move on to while they look up that bill?
Sure. On the House side, I would just be curious to hear Leader Wilcox about your thoughts on Blake moving forward. What would you like to see out of that proposal? And do you feel that, I guess I'm just curious, kind of how things might look on the House side.
Well, I think, first of all, I absolutely want it to move forward and I want it to be as robust as possible. Evidence of the last couple of months in the House, I think, is that the House Democratic Caucus shows less concern for public safety, I think, than any other caucus in the building. And it may be a difficult sell, although you have some people on the Democratic side that have been quite forthcoming in talking about the fact that they made a mistake with their vote in the last few years. And it may be that that part of the caucus is able to overcome the ideological resistance that you see over there to almost any proposal that helps people regain their sense of responsibility for their actions. We are going to, I think, do everything we can to help the bill advance and at the same time strengthen it when it looks like there's a possibility to do that.
Did you have a follow-up, Claire?
Yeah, Rep. Wilcox, I wonder if you could elaborate when you say strengthen the bill.
You know, I think I'd probably defer to the people on at the committee level on that. I don't have a specific proposal in mind.
Thank you.
Claire, so my concern with this bill is that it's automatic voter registration. So, and we're all supposed to be going to real ID. It's been happening since I became a legislator, now 12 years ago, but it's coming and it's going to happen. So you're automatically registered, which means you automatically get a ballot, which is, you would think that would be fabulous, but not everyone chooses to vote. So we're going to be spending a ton of money to mail out ballots that will never be, for me, it's very purely a fiscal concern. We're going to be spending a ton of money to send out ballots that will never be returned, and to what end? So the idea that we can be fiscally responsible with our elections and make sure that people who want to vote can vote, and that they're entitled to vote, and then they get a ballot, I think just seems like a wise course from my point of view, but I speak only for myself. Other people may have different reasons for doing what they're doing.
Yeah, Claire, I went back and looked, and I don't remember every bill we vote on with perfect clarity, but when I look at this bill, it just looks like we're adding cost and complication without a lot of upside. So I voted no. I don't think it's a tremendous bill one way or the other, but I think on the balance, it was a no vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll go ahead to closing remarks. Senator Braun.
Well, thank you, Kim. Thank you everyone for showing up today and asking some challenging questions. I appreciate that. And we'll continue to focus on our priorities. You've heard me say it many times: our public safety, affordability for the folks around Washington and education. There's a lot of work to do here, and we have not a lot of time left, so we got to get to it. Have a good day.
Well, and I also thank Claire, who's the one that's still on here, although I know that there's a lot of other people that watch. I forgot one bill that I'm really glad died. That's the Commission on Extremism. As I said a few weeks ago, I thought that was a very dangerous thing. It reminds me of the notorious 50s era House Un-American Activities Committee. And I'm glad that Democrats in the state, I think, took a look at that and decided that it wasn't a good bill to advance. One more victory for moderation, I think. I hope you get the same impression I am. After a couple of years of really dysfunctional government, government mostly by the governor, government with a whole bunch of representatives that don't even know each other because they've never met, I think we're slowly getting back to the place where people are learning how to govern together. And I haven't felt this optimistic in a long time about the Washington State Legislature. I'm glad it's happening, even though there's still plenty of things that we don't agree with and are going to vociferously oppose. Thanks, everybody.